Hello, today is Monday, March 18th, and welcome to episode 311 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI's Deputy Executive Director, Jessica Jones, and today I'm joined by two NSI senior fellows, Les Munson and Morgan Vigna, and a very special Monday guest, our own Director of Policy, John Lipsey, who usually is rocking one AirPod, but we've convinced him to go without any. So if you can't hear him, that's our fault, guys. Welcome to a new week, everyone. Today we're talking about a not too new story, actually, or not too new development. We're talking about Niger, which announced on Saturday its decision to end its counterterrorism alliance with the U.S. and ordered the under 1,000 American armed forces personnel to leave the country. It deals a serious blow, but kind of only the most recent, as we've talked about in the show, to the Biden administration's efforts to, deal with countries in the Sahel and broker collaborative relationships. And it kind of, it's a little ominous with dominoes feeling like they're breaking down across the region as countries move closer to Russia. American officials have been working to salvage the relationship with Niger since the country had a coup in July. There have been restrictions on aid under American law. Like I mentioned, there have been tightening ties with Russia, as well as with its neighbors Mali and Burkina Faso, which also have its own dictators. In recent months, U.S. and other Western officials have also obtained intel indicating that the junta was considering a deal with Iran that would give that country access to some of Niger's vast uranium reserves. And Western officials have said that these talks have been at a very advanced stage. With all that going on, that set the stage for a visit last week by U.S. officials, including U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, to talk to the junta about the U.S. and Niger's, future relations and discussions on, and I quote, Niger's return to a democratic path. The junta spokesman accused the U.S. of trying to prevent Niger from choosing its own diplomatic and military partners and said that the U.S. state official had displayed, and I quote, a condescending attitude towards the talks. So my first question is, are we surprised? This goes to you, Morgan, because I know you've got probably some takes on this, at the quote, condescending attitude of the U.S. when talking about, and pushing for a democratic future for Niger.
Yeah, taking a macro approach here, I think when we take a look at how the United States has approached the African continent now for decades, we have deprioritized it, right? Our national security interests, frankly, have been elsewhere, whether that's in the Middle East or in the Indo-Pacific, or more recently what we've seen in Europe with Russia's war in Ukraine. And so as a result, you see the African continent really sort of lower down on the U.S. priorities. Unfortunately, by not being there, by not being present, taking at times a very self-righteous tone when it comes to democracy, we've really pushed away a lot of potential partners in the region. Not to say that we should be cozying up to junta leaders, but nevertheless, the fact that we haven't had a strong presence, haven't prioritized our relationships with the continent, I think is indicative of sort of what we're seeing today play out. The fact that we sent, both State Department and AFRICOM to Niamey. I mean, we want to have our cake and eat it too, right? We want democracy, but at the same time, we want to preserve our interests in Agadez with our base there. I mean, at some point, like we need to really pick one and really focus on that. I mean, I do think there can be a balance, but by sending both folks there, I don't know if that sent the message that they were hoping for.
And John, we talk a lot about, Russian influence and leverage and growing partnerships on the African continent, but all of a sudden we've got Iran in this story. I know that can be some of the favorite topics of folks here on the show. Like, what do you make of that kind of wrench that the U.S. is now, announcing and discussing?
Yeah, I just find it interesting that for this administration and the Obama administration, obviously the policy around Iran's nuclear program has obviously seeking to have transparency and some degree of constraints around it, but ultimately to allow a robust civilian nuclear program, and certainly recent weeks and months as we've seen a policy of basically providing continued financial assistance to Iran, seeking to keep a lid on their nuclear program, but certainly no real progress there. And in this instance, we seem to have the right hand perhaps not knowing what the left hand is doing, and a crisis of relations with a key counterterrorism ally over actually kind of seeking to restrict Iran's access to uranium, and seeking to restrict their nuclear program in a way that we haven't seen them robustly, do from the White House. So I do find that interesting. I think Morgan is, her point here is probably the more significant one, that this is much has been said about the U.S. Not prioritizing its relationship with Africa, not prioritizing, not working in concert with leaders there, and to achieve their goals around development, and allowing, which has allowed China and Russia and others to come in a way that is less questioning of or seen as less of an imposition on their sovereignty and their decisions over government and economic models and the like. And so there's obviously we're not succeeding there. We're losing out to to our adversaries and influence in that region, and um, continuing to sort of double down on a dialogue with that region that hasn't been successful seems misguided. And it seems like we really need a big reset here in how we think about our approach to Africa, both from a security perspective and how we partner with them diplomatically going forward.
Les, how do we, I'm gonna put you in the hard spot. How do we begin to turn the tides and actually develop some kind of successful relationship with countries in the Sahel? And what do you make of the visit last week by U.S. officials?
Well, I agree with Morgan and John. I mean, this is a big failure by the administration. The coup happened on their watch. The coup response happened on their watch. This possibly getting kicked out of Niger is happening on their watch. These guys were supposed to be the adults in the room who could competently run U.S. foreign policy. Policy's incoherent. We don't know whether we're emphasizing the base or democracy or human rights. We need to find a way forward here that makes sense. It's possible the A team is not really working on this case so far, and maybe we should change that. I would point out that as far as I can tell, there's about 1,000 U.S. forces in Niger. That's more than we have in Syria. So this is a big interest to the United States, what's happening there. It doesn't seem like we're paying attention to what's happening. And this is yet another failure of this administration. Look at Afghanistan. Look at the total misapprehension of what was happening in Gaza right before October, the horrific attacks of October 7th, when the National Security Advisor put in print that things had never been more calm in the Middle East. This administration does not have its act together. Things need to change. They need to refocus. And I'm thinking about the last year of the Carter administration, which is just a few years ago, when it was clear that the Carter approach, which was human rights first, was not working, and they changed things in their final year. They called for a defense buildup. They started aiding groups that were fighting against communism, and they had a different approach to the world. Biden is not doing that. So I would much rather see, frankly, the final year of the Carter administration than the final year of the Biden administration. This is a nice little example of how their policy is not working. By the way, I don't think this is catastrophic necessarily. This is probably a negotiation by the Nigerians for a better deal from us. I hope we're aware of that and we go back to them and find a way to work this thing out. But it is evidence to me that the alleged benefits Biden was supposed to bring adults in the room is not really happening.
So I'm going to just come to their defense just a little bit here. The immediate sort of impact on the relationship has been really driven by statute that Congress owns. When we have a coup, there are significant immediate consequences on U.S. aid. It hamstrings and handcuffs U.S. policy to a significant degree when that happens. Obviously, we want to have strong, disincentives for coups, especially military takeovers of democracies. We don't want to be rewarding that kind of behavior, but I think Congress, may need to, it certainly isn't consistent in how we are able to interact with different, types of authoritarian regimes around the world in counterterrorism efforts or economic partnerships or the like. It sort of stands apart, and we probably need to recalibrate that policy area. But that said, the White House certainly knew all of that going in, and clearly did not have a solution that was going to be rational, be coherent enough to allow us to maintain our interests there, at least in the immediate term here.
Jones, can I just respond quickly and say I largely agree with John, but I think the administration needs to use that as leverage with the Nigerians and point out, look, we have a hard stop here in certain areas. We need to find a way to work together. It's still up to the president to make the determination that there was a coup. What Congress really ought to do, instead of changing that law necessarily, is give the administration more tools, particularly on the security front, to work with countries in this position. Because right now, those countries aren't really seeing the relationship with the U.S. as to their best advantage. The Wagner Group is doing a better job of providing services they want. That should be a lesson for us.
And sorry, Jess, I know we're over time already, dear listeners, but at the same time, just to sort of summarize all of this, I mean, I think as the democratic space in the world continues to shrink, the United States needs a sort of hit the refresh button when it comes to how we pursue democratic progress abroad. I think we're operating in an age of a bygone era, and I think we need to hit reset when it comes to how the United States approaches democracy writ large.
John Lipsey joins for the week, and the first episode runs over. This might be an omen for the future, you guys.
You're welcome.
Welcome to the
More
week of March
content.
18th. More content. You asked for it, we gave it to you. That's a wrap. Thanks so much to Devlin Burney, Claude Jennings, and the NSI team for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Wednesday, a potentially longer episode, on March 20th for another episode of Fault Lines, National Security's podcast that gets you quickly smart, fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so if you want to check out what John Lipsey looks like, you can watch our video there. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Have a great week.